There are plenty of factions for the party to get involved with in Dragon Heist. A lot of them good, some of them a bit more, morally grey. The party can be pretty easily involved with them, some factions being much easier to get in than others. One or two factions are incredibly specific, while others are much more inclusive of just anything. Today's video will be talking about some of the more good aligned factions, or the ones that are a little less morally sketchy, weird ones. However, when I do talk about the, bad guy factions, I will be able to attach some villains to it, because the Zhentarim, Xanathar Guild, Bregandathe, all of them have a villain attached to them, which is neat, to balance everything out. In any case, welcome back to the Dragon Heist series. Before we get properly talking about factions, I do want to preface this video with a rundown of exactly what I'm actually going to be talking about. This series, if you didn't know before, relies on you having already read through the section that I'm going to be talking about today. In terms of factions, I'll be helping you guys read between the lines on this sort of stuff and figure out how to use these factions much more beyond level 5. I've had a lot of experience with how these factions run outside of Waterdeep and beyond in a larger campaign due to what happened with me running this campaign. Ended in a TPK just last session. First off, we have the Emerald Enclave. I'm doing alphabetical order, baby. The Emerald Enclave is first, and probably, if I'm going to be completely honest, my least favourite in terms of what they do. I think it's neat that they're there, giving a druid, a ranger, a barbarian a bigger sense of community in a city that isn't really geared towards that sort of class per se. Waterdeep is much more favourable to most other classes, and the more nature-based tribal ones are a little more rejected, so Emerald Enclave helps in that regard and gives them a little bit more something to do. In terms of how this faction serves the rest of the game, they're very loosely associated to the rest of the story. It's understandable that they wouldn't be associated with it massively, sure in small ways, but if the faction had an alignment per se, it would be lawful neutral. They aren't intervening much in the story. Most of their missions for members solving problems that will come to them instead of, running around looking to solve the world's issues. It's a cool faction for a nature boy to join, but other than that, it doesn't serve the story too well. If you want this faction to feel more involved, I would definitely recommend getting one of the main villains to start using nature and monsters a lot more to mess with things and destroy the balance, etc, etc. Might get the attention of this faction. I'm not sure how you would make them viable to be involved in the story fully as you go along without other factions just doing it better. There are certainly aspects that you could use this for. I think that there's a few interesting things that you could do with the Emerald Enclave outside of Waterdeep. It's a faction that I feel doesn't belong in Waterdeep, but helps those that don't belong feel like they do. That's kind of the purpose of it, as far as I've read into it. I think a few interesting ones for them would maybe be jungle explorations. Maybe outside of Waterdeep, a jungle has become completely infested with a disease that's killing everything in there, plants and creatures alike, and even the people. And they need you to go and find the source. It's hidden in a temple underground, and you need to go and get the relic out and destroy it, or attune to it and take on the blight yourself, etc, etc. That's a cool-ass mission that's in the vein of the Emerald Enclave, and I think that that could be fun to explore. Force Grey is quite possibly the most popular faction, at least from what I've seen. It's also my personal favourite because it's the most badass one. If you need to learn a little bit about Force Grey, there's a couple of campaigns out there, or like smaller games of D&D out there, where people play as members of Force Grey. I think Matt Mercer ran a game with like Ashley Johnson and Joe Manganiello and a couple others, where they were all Force Grey. Yeah, Force Grey is a big deal. Their missions are the best, the flavour is neat, and it's the faction I had the most fun messing around with. I had actually gone beyond Waterdeep with this faction as they started sending the party to outskirts, towns and villages to solve local problems. Now, the way that the faction works is great, letting the party start as members of Force Grey Junior, in essence, the Grey Hands, basically working their way up. It's a decent motive for them to push forward with their objectives that the faction grants. I really like the leader, Vajra Safar. I played her as a stern leader who got the job done. That was, of course, a ruse, since she's a really young black staff and is only just getting into the groove of things. Plus, she's a really powerful archmage with basically a staff of power, but better. I don't think I have too many improvements I can offer. This is a good-ass faction that could carry you way beyond 5th level and keep the story interesting. If you're planning to use Force Grey, get the entire party in on it. It's a big deal faction, and they wouldn't mind a whole party. I think a decent example of a good old quest that you could send them on is the main quest. Like, the Force Grey could cover the main objective. They could have finally figured out the big bad evil guy alongside the players with their help, because the players want to do the thing. So maybe the players discover it, tell Force Grey, and then Force Grey gives them the big mission to go sort it out, etc, etc. The Harpers are probably the coolest in terms of their concept, and they serve the story quite well, I found. They can be easily integrated into basically everything, and are quite possibly the coolest one for players to be involved with. I do find that most of the missions that the faction can give are certainly faithful to what the faction is, but some of them sound somewhat boring and unoriginal. They can be somewhat funny, like talking to the horse or saving the cat, but overall don't really do anything too big for me. I would perhaps really lean into the spy aspect, maybe get the party to go into a Zhentarim hideout and collect some important papers while not being seen. It could also simply involve keeping an eye on one of the villains, which could result in them feeling more motivated to go ahead and mess with the enemies of the campaign. Maybe they're suspicious of Jarlaxle, or... well, not Jarlaxle, they're suspicious of those ships, and they get the party to spy on them for ages, and then turns out they're drow, and yeah... etc, etc, and I think that'll be pretty interesting. So there's some short advice on factions for you. Stay tuned for some more advice in the Waterdeep series. If you think this helped you consider using any of the factions or gave you an idea of what works and what doesn't, maybe give us a like or even subscribe if you want more. Keep the discussion going in the comments or in our Discord, which you can find in the description. And with that, thank you for watching. See you soon. Idiot, go run Dragon Heist. What are you doing sitting here? You need to go run D&D, nerd. Go do it now, dumbass.